You're live.
Yay. Okay, we are live on YouTube. This is the Node.js tooling group meeting. Tierney, you're just gonna, okay, you've made me host. See you later. Thank you for your help, Tierney.
Yeah, no problem.
So the agenda for this meeting, the first thing I wanted to talk about was kind of the current initiatives. And so the only formal initiative that we had was this recursive operations thing. And by formal, I mean there's like a file in the repo and it's in the initiatives dir and it says, recursive file system operations. And so this is the only thing we've bothered to actually write down. And so what's happening there? We of course have makedir has been implemented by Benko, and the other thing that we were working on was rimraf. And so what's going on there? I had been working on an implementation of recursive rimdir, and I have so far implemented like a sync version and an async version, and these seem to work. The problem is that my implementation is written in C++, and the problem is that it runs in serial, and so that means it'll delete every file one by one. And when I ran a benchmark against my code and the rimraf module in userland, I found out that in some cases it's even a little bit slower. Basically it's not adding a whole lot in terms of performance, because the userland rimraf works in parallel. Basically it says, okay, it fires off as many file system operations as Node will let it do at once. And so in the C++ implementation, I'm just doing stuff one at a time. Now, so that was just kind of the first pass. And so once I got to this point, I looked at it and say, well, you know what? If this rimraf implementation is going to be worth adding to core, it really does need to be it needs to offer advantages over the userland rimraf, and if it's not at least as fast, then I mean it's really hard to justify. So making that implementation work in parallel is kind of a little bit of uncharted territory, for two reasons. One is that if for some reason you wanted to call like rimdir sync and you wanted to do it recursively, well, we would need to do some sort of black magic like exec sync does, if you're familiar with that, where it's actually an async operation, but Node pretends it is blocking. And so with exec sync, so that's all well and good, but it's not firing off multiple operations at once. And so it's kind of there's really no precedent for this in Node right now. Exec sync obviously does this thing where it pretends that it is async, but as far as just launching a bunch of file system operations in parallel, I don't think anything's doing that. And for me personally, like, I kind of suck at C++, and once I got this far, like I just kind of hit a wall. How do I implement this? It's just kind of it feels a bit beyond where it's beyond my skill level at this point, and so I'm not like really. I got frustrated and kind of gave up, more or less, saying, I just don't know how to do this. It's going so slow. I don't know where to start. I have so many questions. I'm probably not the right person to do this. And so I think we need to kind of pull back from that implementation. Now, I'm not saying we need to, unless there's somebody on this call, both either one of you who would, kind of want to look at that and say, and see if you can do that implementation. I would say we should scrap it and perhaps look to a JavaScript implementation, much like the user land rimref, and then hopefully get the back end to a point where we can avoid some of the like weird hacks that the user land rimref does to work properly on Windows. So the C++ in that sort of implementation might want to go look at libuv and see how it's handling directory removal on Windows and see if that can be improved, because there's some it's like if you remove a directory, it's actually an async operation in NTFS or something like that, and it's just the userland rimref has to simply poll and see if the directory has actually been removed. And so it just like fires off a set interval and calls stat or something over and over again until the directory doesn't exist. And so maybe there's something we can do in the back end about that. And so, that sort of thing is no longer necessary. But I talked to Ben Coe kind of before this meeting. He should join up, but he suggested maybe that's what we should be doing is we should kind of just give up on the C++ implementation and see if we can get it done on the JavaScript side. Does anybody have any opinion about that? Is anybody interested in working on that, or what are your thoughts?
So yeah, I've implemented rimref several times in JavaScript. It actually ends up being pretty straightforward to do it fairly quickly. So I'm happy to take a look at doing it on the JavaScript side. That sounds good to me. But before I go ahead and mute myself one more time, Guy Bedford has joined, and he should probably be promoted to a panelist on Zoom.
Where is this? Oh, there we go. Guy Bedford. Hello, Guy Bedford. Thank you for coming. I was just, I'm not sure when you popped in. I was just kind of explaining where rimref was at, and basically I'm stuck on the C++ implementation because it's too slow, because it's in serial, and it will be too much of a pain in the butt to implement to do in parallel.
Sure, I caught the trail end of that, and it sounds to me like stuff that I don't have much experience in personally. I didn't realize how much awfulness was involved in that C++ side. But yeah, if anything, the JS implementation can be a starting point, and optimization can grow over time, surely. So
yeah, absolutely.
Does that make sense? Or yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and so I would absolutely love your help, Brian. So
yeah, I was just going to add, normally what happens over the course of these PRs is that folks will pipe in with their performance optimizations of the PR as it goes along anyway. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, well, let's coordinate on that. I have some, at the very least, some tests you could probably reuse. But yeah. So, and I don't know if you've looked at the RimRaf modules implementation where they do this sort of Windows hacks I'm talking about, but that would be really nice to not have to do that. And we can probably tackle some of those things down the road. But anyway, so yeah, that was the kind of the main initiative. Is anybody else working on anything that might be worth mentioning or kind of promoting to an official initiative?
So I still have my exec work sitting on a branch somewhere. It's probably close to ready to go in terms of Linux and Unix and Mac-ish implementation. As far as Windows goes, well, it's always going to be kind of different. So I don't even know how far it can really go there. But yeah, perhaps what I can do is open the PR and see if maybe I can get some help on the Windows side, or if it's potentially landable without the Windows side of things.
Right. I feel like I recall that there was some discussion somewhere about it, and people were reluctant to add something that didn't support Windows as well. Was that the feeling? Did you get that feeling as well?
I did get that feeling to some degree. It's not necessarily clear how the collaborator base at large would react to a Unix only feature, although there are several precedents in Node already. That being said, it would be really nice to get something that does work on Windows, even if it's only like an approximation, considering that Windows doesn't really offer the sort of process replacement functionality that exec provides, at least not to my understanding.
Okay, so I mean, it would make sense to me to, like write down. Is there an issue for this already?
Yeah, there are a few issues, as I understand. I'd have to do some digging, but I think there's a few issues on the Node core repo about having something resembling exec.
Do you have any links to any sort of APIs on this?
You mean like in other systems?
Or even your work in progress? I'm just trying to contextualize the exact feature.
Yeah, sure. I can't really dig anything up right now, but I'll be sure to send it. Make sure it gets attached to the minutes and stuff. Long story short, talking about the feature. It's in Bash, it's in Python, and it's a system call, basically allowing you to replace the process with a completely different one. So this becomes useful in cases where you want to use Node to set up an environment or something like that, and then replace the process entirely with something else. Where this becomes interesting is things like subshells and stuff like that. But anyway, that's sort of the long and short of it. But yeah, it's like exactly or whatever in system calls.
Would you be interested in writing up kind of why? I don't know, yeah, just kind of writing something up and sending a PR, and so we can like record that as an initiative in the tooling repo.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
As soon as I get some time, I'd be happy to do that.
Okay, thank you. Okay, cool. So, Ian, Guy, is there anything else that you're working on right now that might be of interest to the group?
I just noticed that Ben showed up. He's in
okay.
Attendees now. I'm currently working on shimming the makedir module to support the new recursive makedir functionality.
Okay.
So that the code changes there are fairly minimal. The issue that I'm running into is related to its testing dependencies. It's quite out of date. The tests currently only run on Node 5. So I'm trying to get that working on Node 10, and then the actual code change there I think should be pretty minimal. I'm not sure if they're actually going to accept it or not though either. There hasn't been any activity in that repo for about 3 years.
Oh, okay. Ben, you're muted if you're talking.
Is that Substack, Ian?
Yes, it is.
Okay, I can try to get a hold of James if that helps. I'm sure. I think James. I think it's just James has been like living on a volcano somewhere. I think he will accept the pull request probably.
Okay. I could maybe use a little bit of help with that at some point as well, just in terms of upgrading those testing dependencies. There's no clear path forward with some of them, specifically the mockfs dependency. So yeah, I wouldn't mind maybe chatting about that after, sort of come up with a plan to move forward on that.
I'd be willing to take a look at that.
Okay.
So yeah, let's follow up on that, and I'll pull down the repo and see what you're talking about. So mockfs, I don't even know what that is.
Yeah, I opened a PR yesterday where I'm trying to test on newer Node versions on Travis, and I also updated the 2 testing dependencies. But they're also pinning a really old version of npm, which I think is a problem now. So anyways, there is a PR. I'm kind of actively working on it. Once that's in place, the actual code changes should be minimal.
Okay. Cool. Related on the shimming end of things, I did create a shim for process allowed node environment variables, or whatever the hell it's called. And so that is npm package node-environment-variables, I think. Is that what I called it? No. What did I call it? Gosh. Node environment flags. Node environment flags. There we go. So yeah, node environment flags is a polyfill for process allowed node environment flags. And so the idea with this, of course, is that it basically provides you a list of things that can be specified node options. And so that was pretty clear in terms of Node 8, because node options exists in Node 8. And so I was able to, yeah, basically what I did is I went and I downloaded every single minor version and tried to make a list of these flags that were allowed, and I stuffed them into a big JSON file. But pre-Node 8, and so we're just talking Node 6, there is no node options environment variable. So I just kind of had to make a guess at what would be allowed. That's what I did. So there's this thing. If anybody wants to use it, Mocha will use this very soon. But yeah, that's the deal. Node-environment-flags.
Chris, do we have a plan for, as we start to rate some of these modules like the shim for McDerp 2, do we have a plan for where we're going to list some of the work that we've done? Like, do you think the Node.js tooling README maybe? Or what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good idea. Sure.
Just so other people can reference the work that's happened so far too.
Yeah. Where was that? Sorry, looking up. Right. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about was like updating the README, and I think that's one like a great thing that should go in there is, this is what we've done so far. And yeah, if you have done any sort of shimming or polyfill type work, it should go in there. And in general, I would love to kind of make the README more, official sounding and not so amateurish and off the cuff, because I just kind of pulled it out of my ass. So anyhow, if anybody is interested in even rewriting the README, have at it. So yeah. Anything else anybody is working on that is relevant?
I continue to be doing some of the test coverage stuff to just try to get test coverage working as a native Node feature rather than like code rewrite, which is how Istanbul works right now. Mm-hmm. I'm down a rabbit hole. I'm actually have a patch on V8 again, which always takes months. So it's my never-ending work around V8 and Node to get test coverage working. But I'm optimistic about this current set of work I'm doing. So,
does that work for modules?
Should work for ES modules. Yeah, it should work for anything. It basically it instruments the bytecode as it's being run by V8, and then gives you test coverage out the other side. So it should work for modules or ES6 code or whatever. The big issue right now that's blocking me on the Node end of things is that regular CJS code has a wrapper added to it, which adds a ton of extra bytes before and after the file that's being executed, and ESM code does not have a wrapper around it. So there's just byte offset differences off by n issues, depending on whether you're a module or not a module. And also depending on whether you're using the new module loader system to load CJS modules or the old module loader system, or if you're using a shim like the ESM shim that provides the shimming for modules that John David Dalton did, that has a different header size than the CJS header size, which is different than the ESM header size. So that's it works, but the devil's in the details right now because of all these differences in how modules are loaded.
Would you think of doing something like a common syntax to note the offset or something odd like that?
I don't think that's a bad idea. I mean, I'm kind of hopeful that there's a couple pull requests open on Node.js that remove the wrapper because the wrapper is actually an additional API call now in V8. You can say, run this code, and this code should have this wrapper around it, and it splits that out into two parts. So if we move Node towards doing that, then everything should be a zero offset, and then everything gets easier. But I can share some links, Guy, after. I'll share them in a second. But that doesn't solve the problem of John David Dalton's shim, because he would need to switch his shim to using this new V8 API, and I'm not sure what that would look like. So,
but if there's a path there, then he could surely try that, right? Yeah,
I mean, that's what I'd prefer. I'd prefer that your code has no wrapper around it and that it's using this new V8 API that lets you add wrappers to stuff. I'll share that right now.
Okay. Ben, what are you doing?
So I could mention briefly, if we have a moment, and it's not really related to much of this stuff, but one thing I was, that maybe I'd just be interested to hear your opinions on, and if it's completely off topic, just let me know. But one thing I'm thinking of doing is trying to deprecate the process and buffer globals in Node, because of the fact that by default, we will get these globals in ES modules. And the problem with that is, as we move to a world where we're thinking of principle of least responsibility from a security perspective, in modules, if every modules naturally have an encapsulated environment because they only have access to the bindings that they import. We don't need globals as a mechanism to share API capabilities. So the idea is that if you can lock down a module and then we get things like frozen realms in future, etc., that it could be quite a useful, it starts to become a secure environment. But process and buffer expose a lot of very low level capabilities. Process has high resolution timers. It also has access to things like all the bindings, all the native bindings. So I was hoping to aim for a path to see if we can deprecate these by basically making the global.process and global.buffer getters a warning, and then adding them into the wrapper for the CJS wrapper. So this is why I just mentioned it, because you brought up the wrapper changes. So have them come through in the wrapper. They're always going to be in CJS. And then if you access them on global.process or global.buffer, you'd get a warning and then eventually a deprecation path. And I don't know if that is at all associated with this group or not, but I mean, just to mention it to see if that's something that anyone has any thoughts on as well, while we had that moment. So. No immediate rejections or thoughts against it.
Certainly no thoughts against it. Yeah.
That helps to hear it in itself.
Yeah, I think I don't fully understand. I haven't done a whole lot of work in ES modules, and so I don't fully understand like what the deal is. But yeah.
All right. Yeah. Looks, I'm going to probably be posting an issue to Node Core soon to try and move with that. It's going to be quite a tough one, but I would like to move forward with that.
Yeah. Can you? Do you have any stuff you can share already, Guy?
I can share the original posting for that on the modules group if you're interested. I'll find the link now.
Yeah, I'd love to read through that. My main thing with modules right now is I don't do much front end coding, and I don't have much of a use for modules, but I really want test coverage to work properly for them. So I have this weird edge case use of them where I'm just trying to make sure that everything I write works properly with that new world.
I really like that you can get coverage going natively in Node. I think that's going to be excellent. It'll be interesting to see how that interfaces with other tools like test runners and things like that.
Okay, so
I'll read through this thread guide and it's going to give me more context.
Cool. All right. So a thing was, and I wrote this down, and I don't know if anybody cares about this, but I'm kind of of the opinion that we don't really need anything like this right now. But I'm wondering if people want a more formal like decision-making process or what have you. I feel like it's a little bit too early for that, but you may disagree. If you also think it's too early, then we can just table it and move on and kind of talk about it when there's more to talk about. What do you think?
It's great to have an idea of process, even if it isn't completely explicit to begin with. But I think having a discussion around it and a discussion around what the general principles are going to be is definitely useful at this stage.
Okay. So, I mean, I would guess that, and I'm not really familiar with the way other groups work, but I'm going to assume they work kind of like the like TSC or what have you, where they try to do, it's consensus building or whatever. What is defined as a quorum, I'm not quite sure. How many members need to be in attendance to make an actual decision, I don't know. As far as decisions that this group is actually making, I think that's kind of decisions insofar as, yes, we want to work on thing X, any decision there has really no bearing on whether any individual member of this group goes off and does it anyway. You know what I mean? So even if it's not something that the group would want to get behind, I mean, it certainly doesn't. Maybe it's for reasons that it doesn't necessarily. We're hard. It's difficult to tie into tooling. Maybe we actually disagree with it entirely. I don't know, but. It's just kind of, I feel like the decisions that we have to make are more of the, okay, what should we put our name on, variety at the moment. In the future, I would love to, and I'm already seeing some of this where people are CCing Node.js tooling on some of the issues, and that's great. I mean, I'm not sure what to do with that necessarily, other than offer my opinions where I can or I feel comfortable. But
I like the idea that we'd eventually present a bit of a roadmap for some of the stuff we have on our mind, which I unfortunately have been shipped around the US for the last couple of months and have not done like I said I would. So I apologize. But I think it could be good to say, like, we eventually intend to finish up RimRaf, and we have these shims we're working on, and we're interested in moving into this area too, just to give people an idea of the scope of work we're thinking about doing. And it just kind of keeps us, I don't know, I think a few more wins for the working group would be good, because I think it will kind of be just psychologically good for us, and kind of demonstrates to other folks on the Node project what our area of interest is.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, so Guy, is that kind of what you were thinking of? I mean, I think I just kind of went off on a
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the only process I have experience with is the modules group at the moment, and Miles is very good at running that and has a lot of good ideas with that stuff. So I mean, as I just posted there, I believe the list of members that forms the quorum is maintained by an automated tool, so it kind of makes sure that it's. I don't know how the exact rules play out, but it could be worth chatting to Miles to find out about that. But it's updated with a PR periodically, and then those who've attended the meetings based on their actual attendance ends up forming the ongoing group and the quorum available. So it's all worked out pretty well, and then every PR decision to the main repo has to get a vote from quorum. So the first thing we'll do in the meetings is go through the PRs, and if we have quorum, get them merged in. If we don't have quorum, then we'll wait until we do have quorum to be able to sort them out. But if we get enough approvals based on quorum, then we can get those PRs in outside of the main Zoom meetings as well. And that seems to be working for us. And the membership's changed over time. It's evolved over time. But the people in quorum has evolved with that. So that's worked relatively well. And as this group grows, a similar approach might work. I guess I'm just copying Miles, really. So
that sounds reasonable to me. No reason to do something from scratch that.
Cool. Yeah, no, that makes sense to me too. And it fits within the existing project, which is that, you have sign off from 2 collaborators if you want to land something. So we already, the folks who are involved in the project, who are collaborators, already have that option available to them.
So anonymous observer, who's not actually an observer, because this anonymous observer has said something. But anyway, they suggested to use a champion-based roadmap rather than a team roadmap. And, that sounds like a good idea to me. Any thoughts on that? I'm
just wondering, I don't hate that idea. I'm just wondering, how would it be presented? Would it be like, say that you were the champion for RimRaf, Chris, would we still have some sort of unified document? It's just that your name's attached to that, which you're pushing for, or I wonder what that process looks like. Can you actually speak, anonymous observer?
Or is it kind of like the TC39 process, where you have champions who bring proposals, and then the vote of that proposal is based on quorum? Yeah, I mean, would that kind of explain your question on that?
I think that explains it better to me. So we basically, in the repo, potentially even have an RFCs folder, and those RFCs, if they've been ratified, then those represent the roadmap. Is that similar?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's something to discuss. How what it takes to get something on the roadmap, and what are the stages. I mean, one doesn't want to get too detailed in breaking down a whole bunch of formal stages necessarily, um, but maybe if there is going to be a process to be able to put the weight of the group behind an individual proposal, an individual PR into Node Core, that there should be a process to say we're investigating this feature, or this feature is now ready to merge into Node, and we as a group put our consensus behind this feature. Yeah, I guess that could be something that you put a core in. What are you thinking there?
Oh no, just reading Anonymous Observer. Yeah, so yeah, that makes sense.
That makes sense to me too. I think there's, like you say, we don't want a ton of minimal process. Like, for one thing, one concern I have is if we get too hung up on an RFC, we might get sick of arguing for a feature if there's contention before we even get to the point of doing any work on the feature. So sometimes I think there's a benefit to pull request driven process. But I also do think maybe like it would have been smart to do an RFC for McDirt before we did McDirt. So I don't know, maybe what do we feel like as a group? Do we want to reach consensus before work's done, or do we want to move towards consensus after a little bit of reference work has already been done on issues?
Maybe have two phases: investigation and PR, or like if we're going to update the README to list the actual proposals, and then kind of have maybe three headings and say completed proposals, experimental proposals or under consideration, and PRs or current PRs or something like that.
I think having a little bit of process like this would be smart, and it makes sense to me. And I think it would also help communicate outwards what we're actually working on. And also help us keep momentum going, because like we've definitely have not gotten quite as much done as we were hoping to get done since Node Interactive.
Yeah. I think we need to. I think are we okay? 11:42. I don't know why I saw later time, but okay. So we have about 20 minutes or so. But yeah, I think we should definitely. Okay, so I wonder if Guy or Ben would be interested in kind of writing this down in terms of maybe that needs to just be a PR to the README for now. This is how we work.
Yeah, does that so if I was to summarize it, would I say like we're going to have a proposal phase, which is just like really anyone can do, and as a group we decide whether or not we're actually jazzed about a proposal, lands in probably an RFCs folder, and then the next phase of work is that there's a pull request that we're actually working around. Does that make sense? I think we can start simple with just a proposal and then a pull request that falls onto it.
Yeah, if the proposal could be its own repo or an issue or something just to link to, and something that can be maintained without us having to take up that maintenance burden as well, so the champion can really take responsibility for it while it's in that experimental phase.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we just throw a folder in the tooling, repo, and then like Anonymous Observer suggested, like we can even probably crib some of the format from was it TC39 or TCS, or what's the working group, the WSG something or other, I always forget the acronym, but that a bunch of like that the URL RFC is being worked on around. I need to look it up.
Isn't the URL a watchword spec or URL API?
That is the acronym I couldn't think of. Yeah. Yeah, maybe worth looking at. Probably not as heavyweight as that process, but worth maybe looking at some of what those proposals have in them.
Guy, I know you created an issue. I don't know if anybody's responded. Actually, about URLs.
Yeah, I was just particularly interested. It came up in another issue, and it seemed like it was a useful feature, and I wasn't sure if it was associated with this group or not. Uh, and it just felt like something that was slipping on that issue. Um, a passed out relative is a very common use case. In Node modules, we are using URLs to refer to all modules, URLs, file URLs. So, and it's something that I've also hit many times in writing servers, is you often want to do relative URL stuff. And especially since the effectively isn't the current URL API deprecated, for the Watwag API instead.
Mhm.
So is there a URL relative that is available at the moment apart from that? Yeah, I haven't checked the APIs carefully, but it seemed like it might be a gap, but you might know more than me.
I don't know off the top of my head, but like, is Watwig, do they have any concept of relative URLs in their specification?
No, so that will do, basically that gives you path.resolve, but it does not give you path.relative. It gives you path.resolve and path.join, because you can do new URL, and then you can create a URL relative to another URL, and it'll do relative resolution. But if you want to get the relative URL from one to another with the right amount of backtracking or whatever, there isn't a nice API to do that. And the other thing is, if you are using path.relative to do that, then you've got to swap out your path separators for forward slashes. And if you don't have a dot at the beginning, you've got to add your initial dot forward slash, which is, just work that feels like it gets repeated, and the sort of thing that, from a tooling perspective, seems like something that can be refined. So I'd be interested in working on something like that.
Yeah,
possibly if you're interested in it, or
yeah. What I find kind of interesting about that is that there's a real chance for us to, one of the things that I think is valuable about the tooling initiative is that the sorts of challenges that people working on command line tools in Node.js run into are different than the types of challenges in some cases that people run into doing front-end module development. So there's room, like in this case, I would say there's almost room for us to even start the conversation on the Watwig repo and say, listen, this specification is most of what we need for a lot of our use cases on the Node project, but there's this one specific feature that we feel is lacking. Would you be open to, in addition to the specification, that, because I think one of the goals with the URL rewrite was to be having standardized on a specification. Is there room for us to extend that specification to match some of our needs? Maybe the answer is no. But it would be interesting.
It's a worthwhile, direction to consider, definitely.
So I'd love for us to just champion in some of these needs, even at a standards level.
Sure, I can start there. Yeah.
I'd love to be a fly on the wall for that if you do start there. So maybe could you share the issue if you do? I want to see how that goes.
Yeah, I'm generally, it's quite hard to, it can be quite hard in the Watwag without proper representation. So definitely having the support of a group with Node backing could help there. Yeah. If I do post anything, I'll follow that up and what should I just see Node.js /tooling?
That makes sense to me. Yeah, it becomes an interesting question too. Like is a file fragment actually a URL, or are we just using the URL parser on file fragments? There's a file / specification. So I don't know. This is an interesting question. Or are we hung up on standards and Node.js is not a web browser, so it should have APIs that are...
We are going forward with percent encoding in the URLs. So, in the current replacement for _ file name in modules is import.meta.url. We may well get a import.meta.file name or something like that. But for now, it's import.meta.url, which would have percent encoding, all of the URL functionality. So as soon as you want to move that into the file system, then that's why we have these new functions like URL to file path and things like that. So this one kind of feels like it goes along with those use cases, and maybe it falls under this group as well. So yeah.
That makes sense to me. Have we hit all the agenda items, Chris? Sorry, I was a little late.
Well, the only other thing really would be, is this time okay, generally speaking, for everybody? Can we call this a recurring meeting?
This time's usually good for me. I was on contract all last week on site somewhere, so I've been writing up my report. So it was a little bad for me today, but usually it's fine. So.
Yeah, I'm good with this time in general. I think having regular meetings will help with like more steady progress as well.
Mm-hmm.
Keep us accountable.
Yeah, totally. And I think like let's all write up little proposals after this meeting for some of the various things we're working on would be one of my recommendations too, just to speak of accountability.
Yeah, I think and then the other thing was, well, first to that end, I apologize for dragging my feet to get this meeting together. Just a lot of things going on, but
you want to do every 2 weeks, Chris, because that works well for the mentorship group. I think we do every 2 weeks.
Sure. Let's try it and see. If it turns out to be too much, we can reduce it. So, but
yeah, the thing to just watch out for is to find the right level that maintains the momentum of the group. Yeah. So, I mean, the failure scenario is like doing it every 2 weeks and then the attendance gets less or doesn't go up because people feel that's too much of a commitment. Yeah, so if there are any signs of that, to maybe make it less frequently, so that people do make an effort to be there, or we'll see how it goes, I guess. Yeah.
Would people rather do monthly, just who are on the call?
I mean, I'm good with either. Doesn't really make a difference to me.
A couple random topics of conversation I had. We had another RimRaf pull request open that I'm going to guess stalled because it's such a contentious. I didn't actually look, but it's a hard feature to build, and I bet it created a lot of controversy. Do we want to go? Did you keep an eye on that other RimRaf that was open, Chris? Should we go champion that pull request, or do you know
that? What I understood from the issue, the various comments on that issue, was that it was not that it was lacking in some key ways. It wasn't providing a experience that was any better than what exists in userland or what could exist in userland. That PR would still have the same issues that my implementation does, which is that it works in serial, and so that implementation will be slow. Looks like the tests were a little more complete, and so those might be worth like pulling in, but yeah, it didn't look like there was a lot of excitement around merging that specific PR. So
yeah, it's definitely I'm sure it can be much more performant than userland, but it would have to be, we'd have to find a way to be doing deleting multiple files at once, which kind of becomes a hellish pull request. So I don't know, I'm kind of leaning towards your feeling that maybe this is an example of something we should do more in Node, but in JavaScript in Node.
Yeah, I think before you dropped in, Brian said he wanted to look at that JavaScript implementation. So
I'm bullish on us trying to figure out why the heck RimRaf, or why the heck libuv does not do a good job of unlinking on Windows. Like if we could address that issue, even if it's only on newer versions of Windows, and we accept that that's a fact. I don't quite know what it looks like, but maybe there's some maybe we do a JavaScript userland implementation in JavaScript of RimRaf, but can solve a couple of the things that make it really slow, which are like the fact that it's waiting on a sleep on Windows until it can confirm that the file has been unlinked. So they're just silly little things like that. So maybe there's room to address some things there. What was the other thing? The other random thing I wanted to bring up is there's a really cool mentorship thing I do at the University of Urbana, going on my 3rd year now, where there's basically a bunch of college students. I'm just sharing the link. Sorry, it's called Hack Illinois, and it happens at the Champaign-Urbana campus, and it's a bunch of college students spend the weekend programming with open source maintainers to in a hackathon kind of environment, but with mentorship happening, with the goal being to contribute to kind of marquee open source projects like Node, and there's a Python representation. Rust was there last year. I'm going to be at this again in February. I think it would be maybe neat to do a task from the tooling working group as one of the things we do. Like if there's any work to be done on RimRaf, we could do it at that hackathon, or if there's anything else we want to take on, it could be a good way. It's like basically a uninterrupted 48-hour period where we could work on a really neat little issue from the Node project. I could probably get an invite to someone else in the working group as well, with a stipend for travel potentially. So I think it could be cool. It might be a good way to get some momentum, and it's coming up pretty soon. So I don't know how people feel about that, but maybe we say RimRaf could be a really fun thing to have come out of that hackathon. So if RimRaf is kind of still sitting on the sidelines by then, maybe we could make that our project weekend.
I think the hope is by then there could be a few things listed, and they could almost pick their own whatever interests them, sort of thing, even potentially.
Yeah, I kind of would. Last year I was representing Istanbul and as our project, but this year I'd happily go as kind of representative from the Node tooling group instead, which I think they'd like.
Sure, that sounds like it could be very beneficial.
Yeah. Cool.
All right, so we've got like 3 minutes, but as far as other agenda items, the only thing I really had was like, what are some ideas for suggestions for the future? I think one of the things that I regarding a lot of my recent work is one of the things I'd be interested in is taking a look at how Node handles command line options and option parsing, and coming up with a better story for that. But we don't necessarily need to throw out all these ideas here. I mean, you just go into the repo and make an issue and say, discuss amongst yourselves. But
I'm definitely interested in that one.
Yeah.
What was I going to say? I don't know. The test coverage stuff is my never-ending white whale of a project, so I really want to get that finished eventually. That's kind of top of my mind for the open source time I have. I think RimRaf done would be such a natural complement to McDirt too. So I'd love to have us to address that eventually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Okay, so anybody have anything else to add? If not, I think we can conclude this, and I will put I'll create another meeting 2 weeks from today, and get that announced and all those things. So, but anybody have anything else?
No, thanks, Chris. Sorry for showing up late. I will be a better behaved member of the group next 2 weeks.
Same here.
Yeah, same here. Okay, well, thank you, everyone. And thank you, Anonymous Observer.
Sure. Thanks for arranging.
Thanks, everyone.
Mm-hmm. Bye-bye.